The altar you carry within, before your feet touch the floor, before the first word leaves your mouth, before the day asks anything visible of you, an offering has already been made. You open your eyes. For one brief moment the room is quiet, then the mind reaches for what it remembers: a bill, a conversation, a pain in the body, a message that has not arrived, a fear about someone you love. Perhaps your hand reaches toward the phone before your awareness has fully entered the morning. A screen fills with headlines, requests, images, opinions, and evidence that the world has continued without waiting for you. Within minutes, your attention has been distributed among urgency, comparison, memory, and concern. Nothing dramatic appears to have happened. You have not made a public vow, you have not knelt before a visible shrine, yet the first ceremony of the day is complete. Something has received the first offering of your mind. Most people do not think of attention as sacred. They think of it as a practical faculty, useful for reading, driving, listening, completing a task, or remembering a name. When attention fails, they call themselves distracted. When it succeeds, they call themselves productive. But attention is older and deeper than productivity. It is the point at which your life is given to something. Whatever receives your attention receives a portion of your time. Whatever receives your time receives a portion of your life. Whatever receives your life repeatedly begins to occupy the inner sanctuary from which perception, emotion, speech, and action emerge. This is why attention is an altar. An altar is not merely a table in a temple. It is the place where value is revealed by offering. It shows what a person considers worthy of time, sacrifice, trust, and devotion. You may say that peace is important, but if fear receives your first thought every morning and your final thought every night, fear has been given the higher place. You may say that God is your source, but if every difficulty receives hours of anxious contemplation, while prayer receives only hurried seconds, the difficulty has become functionally greater in your consciousness. You may say that you desire a new life, but if your attention remains kneeling before an old injury, the past is still presiding over the inner temple. Every day your attention is worshipping something. This does not mean that you consciously chose every object upon the altar. Much of what occupies the mind entered before you understood the gate. Family taught you what to fear. Culture taught you what to admire. Pain taught you what to watch. Advertising taught you what to desire. Rejection taught you which silences to interpret as danger. The news taught you that alarm deserves immediate access. The body taught you to scan for familiar discomfort. Responsibility taught you to believe that constant worry is evidence of love. You were not taught to guard the altar. You were taught to let the world place anything upon it. That is why this teaching begins without blame. Blame is only another thief of attention. It convinces you to spend the present staring at the fact that you once stared at the wrong things. It turns discovery into accusation. It lowers the eyes toward shame when the purpose of awareness is to restore authority. Responsibility is different. Responsibility says, I now see what has been receiving my life. I can examine the offering. I can remove what does not belong. I can choose what deserves the flame. The French philosopher Simone Weil understood attention as more than mental strain. She saw it as a rare form of generosity, a willingness to become present enough that reality can reveal itself without being immediately covered by our fears, desires, and conclusions. This is why true attention is both psychological and spiritual. It is a way of seeing. It is also a way of surrendering the noise that prevents sight. The central thesis of this book is simple, but its consequences are vast. Whatever repeatedly receives your attention becomes enthroned within you. What becomes enthroned within you eventually governs how you see, feel, choose, speak, and live. Attention becomes repetition. Repetition gathers emotional force. Emotional force enters the subconscious as instruction. The subconscious influences expectation. Expectation guides perception. Perception shapes response. Response becomes habit. Habit builds identity. Identity moves through the world and calls certain experiences familiar, possible, deserved, dangerous, or inevitable. This is not a minor chain. It is one of the hidden architectures of a life. A person may pray for peace while repeatedly attending to conflict. The conscious desire asks for one thing. The repeated offering trains another. A person may desire provision while studying lack with religious intensity. They know every expense, every threat, every example of failure, but rarely attend to skill, order, service, possibility, or previous evidence of support. A person may ask for love while the attention remains fixed upon betrayal, rehearsing every way closeness can become loss. The heart says yes, but the gaze continually prepares for no. The subconscious does not receive only what you request in moments of inspiration. It receives the atmosphere you sustain. Joseph Murphy built much of his teaching around this principle. The conscious mind presents premises, images, expectations, and repeated suggestions. The deeper mind accepts what is emotionally impressed and begins to organize experience around it. Whether one approaches his work as spiritual law, psychological conditioning, or a union of both, the practical challenge remains the same. What are you repeatedly presenting to the deeper mind as truth? The answer is not found only in affirmations. It is found in what you watch when you are afraid, what you imagine when no one is speaking, what you repeat after disappointment, what you expect before a conversation, what you search for in the body, what you notice about money, what you remember about yourself, and what you permit to follow you into sleep. Your true altar is revealed by what receives your attention when no one is watching. This book is not an argument for ignorance. A bill must still be read. A diagnosis must still be faced. A difficult relationship may require truth, distance, or action. The world contains suffering that should not be denied. Attention is not used to erase facts. It is used to prevent facts from becoming gods. You can look directly at a challenge without placing your entire consciousness beneath it. You can receive information without allowing the information to become the emotional climate of the day. You can acknowledge pain without naming the whole future after it. You can remember what happened without continuing to feed the event with the life that remains. The difference is sacred. To attend is to illuminate. The light of consciousness makes an object larger in experience. It brings detail, emotional weight, association, and meaning. This is useful when the object deserves study. It becomes destructive when the light is held upon what cannot be changed, what has already delivered its lesson, or what feeds upon observation without producing wise action. Some worries survive because they have learned that attention is their food. Some resentments remain vivid because they are visited more faithfully than prayer. Some fears feel prophetic because the mind has rehearsed them so often that familiarity is mistaken for truth. Some identities appear permanent because attention has collected only the evidence that supports them. Yet the same law that strengthens fear can strengthen peace. The same faculty that searches for danger can learn to recognize guidance. The same imagination that rehearses humiliation can rehearse dignity. The same morning that begins with alarm can begin with consecration. The same evening that carries the problem into sleep can become a threshold of release. Attention is the first act of creation because it determines what will receive enough inner substance to influence the life. This does not mean that thought controls every external event, nor that every hardship was personally summoned. Other wills exist, circumstances exist, mystery exists. God is greater than technique, but within all that cannot be commanded, attention remains a sacred authority. It decides what the event will be allowed to become inside you. It decides whether the past becomes a prison or instruction. It decides whether uncertainty becomes panic or a field of listening. It decides whether the world appears only as threat or also as provision, beauty, correction, and grace. And the altar of the mind is never empty. If you do not choose what rests upon it, habit will choose, fear will choose, the crowd will choose, the loudest voice will choose, the oldest wound will choose, the nearest screen will choose. This journey will teach you to recognize those forces without becoming afraid of them. You will examine the thieves at the gate. You will see how the mind becomes what it beholds. You will enter the chamber of the subconscious, where repeated offerings become instruction. You will meet the wounded gaze that has been selecting the world through old pain. You will learn how urgency imitates importance, how refusal protects the sacred, and how attention can become prayer. The purpose is not perfect control. A mind that tries to police every thought soon builds another prison. The purpose is return. When attention wanders, return. When fear places itself upon the altar, return. When the past demands another offering, return. When the world becomes louder than the voice within, return. The returning itself is the training. William James would later describe the repeated recovery of wandering attention as a root of judgment, character, and will. The person who can return is not helpless before distraction. The person who can return is becoming the guardian of the inner sanctuary. Take a slow breath now. Notice what has been occupying the center of your mind today. Do not argue with it. Do not condemn yourself. Simply see it. Ask whether it deserves the amount of life it has been receiving. Then imagine a small flame in a quiet sanctuary. The flame is your awareness. It can illuminate fear, but it does not belong to fear. It can illuminate memory, but it does not belong to memory. It can illuminate the world, but it does not belong to the world. The flame was entrusted to you. Before we enter the first chapter, take one quiet moment to subscribe and remain connected to this journey if these words are revealing something you have felt but never named. Some teachings are not meant to entertain the surface. They are meant to return the sacred center of attention to the soul. Now let us begin with the first law of the inner altar. It is never empty. Chapter 1. The altar is never empty. You do not decide whether your attention will serve. You decide only what it will serve. This is difficult to accept because attention feels so private and ordinary. It seems to move without ceremony. The eyes turn toward a headline. The mind returns to a conversation. The imagination travels toward an uncertain future. A memory rises while water is boiling or while the car is stopped at a light. None of these movements appears important enough to shape a destiny. But a life is rarely redirected by one thought alone. It is shaped by the paths the mind walks so often that they become roads. Attention creates those roads. Every return leaves a trace. Every repeated observation tells the mind, this matters. Every emotionally charged revisit says, prepare for this, search for this, remember this, organize around this. Over time, the mind learns a hierarchy. Certain objects move to the foreground. Others fade into the background. A person becomes surrounded by a reality far larger than what they are consciously able to receive, yet only a narrow portion enters experience with force. William James wrote, "My experience is what I agree to attend to." He was not claiming that the entire world is invented by personal preference. He was identifying a severe limit and a profound power. Countless impressions touch the senses, but only some are selected, emphasized, and woven into the story called My Life. Think of a room you know well. Perhaps it is your kitchen, your bedroom, or the place where you work. You have entered it hundreds of times, yet if someone asked you to describe every object, color, mark, sound, and shadow, much would be missing. The room was present, but not all of it entered your lived experience. Attention chose what became real enough to remember. The same selection occurs in relationships. One person remembers every failure of a partner and overlooks every quiet act of loyalty. Another remembers every kindness and minimizes clear patterns of harm. Neither selection is necessarily wise. Attention can reveal truth, and it can also protect illusion. The question is not whether attention selects. It always selects. The question is whether the selection is conscious, honest, and aligned with life. The altar is never empty, because consciousness is always giving emphasis to something. Even boredom is an offering. It tells the mind that the present is unworthy unless stimulation arrives. Even resentment is an offering. It gives a former event another portion of current life. Even comparison is an offering. It places another person's image at the center and asks your own existence to stand before it for judgment. Many people claim that they do not worship anything, yet observe what receives their sacrifice. They sacrifice sleep to worry. They sacrifice peace to arguments that no longer exist outside the mind. They sacrifice gratitude to the constant inspection of what is missing. They sacrifice presence with loved ones to a screen filled with strangers. They sacrifice the work of their own soul to the opinions of people who will never carry the consequences of their choices. Worship is revealed by sacrifice. Attention is one of the purest sacrifices because once a moment of awareness has been offered, it cannot be recovered. Money may return, property may be replaced, reputation may be repaired. But the hour given to fear has become part of the life already spent. This does not mean that every moment must be solemn, productive, or spiritually impressive. Rest deserves attention. Play deserves attention. Beauty, laughter, conversation, and simple pleasure deserve attention. The problem is not that attention is given to ordinary things. The problem is that it is often given unconsciously to forces that leave the person weaker, narrower, and less available to what they claim to love. A person may say family is the center of life, while attention is continually consumed by work, long after work has ended. Another may say health matters while every bodily signal is met either with neglect or fearful obsession. Another may say faith matters, while divine presence is treated as an emergency service, contacted only after anxiety has exhausted every other method. The altar reveals the difference between declared values and lived values. Ask not only what you believe, ask what receives the best of your awareness. The first minutes of the morning are revealing. Before the world has made a new demand, what does the mind voluntarily retrieve? The final minutes before sleep are even more revealing. When performance is finished and no one needs to be impressed, where does attention go? Into gratitude, resentment, planning, fantasy, regret, prayer, fear, or numbness. The private direction of attention is one of the clearest maps of the inner life. There is another reason the altar cannot remain empty. The mind resists a vacuum. When attention is not given a chosen object, it is captured by whatever carries the greatest emotional charge. Fear is powerful because it announces itself as urgent. Desire is powerful because it promises completion. Pain is powerful because the nervous system treats it as a signal requiring immediate interpretation. Social conflict is powerful because belonging has always been tied to survival. This means that simply telling yourself not to think about something is rarely enough. An altar cleared of one object requires a worthier offering. If you withdraw attention from worry but do not place it upon trust, action, or presence, worry will return to the empty place. If you reduce time on a screen but do not recover reading, prayer, creation, nature, or conversation, the old habit will return because it still knows how to fill the silence. If you stop rehearsing resentment but do not discover the life waiting beneath it, the wound will call itself necessary again. Sacred attention is not only refusal, it is rededication. Consider a woman who has spent years worrying about her adult child. Each morning she imagines what may go wrong. Every delayed reply becomes evidence. Every difficulty becomes prophecy. She calls this love because the object of attention is someone she loves. Yet the emotional offering is fear. Her imagination continually places weakness, danger, and failure upon the altar. What would change if she continued to care, communicate, and help where appropriate, but offered a different attention? She might imagine strength rather than collapse. She might notice evidence of growth. She might remember that another soul has a path, a will, and access to guidance beyond her control. She could pray without using prayer as another form of mental surveillance. The love remains, the offering changes. Or consider a man who has endured financial instability. His caution has practical wisdom in it. He checks accounts, reduces waste, and plans carefully. But after the useful actions are complete, his mind continues checking. He calculates the same danger in different forms. He studies stories of failure. He resents every expense. He measures his worth by numbers that change from day to day. The account requires attention. The identity does not require submission. He can examine facts without enthroning lack. He can give focused attention to skill, service, order, negotiation, and opportunity. He can bless what remains, respect what leaves, and refuse to let money become the interpreter of his dignity. The external work may be similar. The inner altar becomes different. This distinction is central. Attention is not sacred because it always feels peaceful. Sometimes the most sacred attention is given to a difficult truth. A neglected debt may need to be faced. A medical appointment may need to be made. A relationship may need to be examined without illusion. A harmful habit may need to be named clearly. Sacred attention is not attention to pleasant things only. It is attention given in service of truth, life, responsibility, and God. Fearful attention circles. Sacred attention sees, decides, and moves. Fearful attention asks the same question because it does not trust any answer. Sacred attention remains long enough to receive instruction. Fearful attention enlarges the problem until the self becomes small. Sacred attention may look directly at the problem, while remembering that the self is more than the problem, and God is greater than both. This is why one of the first practices is to distinguish action from worship. A challenge may require action. Pay the bill, make the call, ask the question, seek help, leave the room, apologize, rest, study, repair. But after the action is complete, notice whether the mind continues making offerings to the challenge. If no further action is possible now, attention must be reclaimed. Many worries pretend to be responsibilities long after responsibility has finished its work. The altar is also revealed by what you notice about yourself. Some people have trained attention to function like an internal prosecutor. It records failures with precision and dismisses growth as insignificant. A harsh word spoken years ago remains vivid. A courageous conversation from yesterday is barely remembered. One rejection becomes evidence of unworthiness. 10 acts of endurance become ordinary and therefore invisible. This is not humility. It is distorted attention. Humility sees accurately. It does not deny weakness, but it also does not deny grace, courage, progress, or capacity. A person who refuses to notice any evidence of becoming is not being honest. They are maintaining an identity through selective observation. Begin to ask different questions. Where did I respond with more wisdom than before? Where did I pause? Where did I tell the truth? Where did I receive help? Where did I survive what I once believed would destroy me? Where did beauty enter without being demanded? These questions do not manufacture a false world. They reveal parts of the real world that fear has been trained to ignore. The practice for this chapter is an audit of the altar. For one day, do not attempt to control every movement of the mind. Observe. Each time you notice a strong return of attention, name the object gently. Fear about the future, approval, pain, a person, money, a mistake, a possibility, God, gratitude, beauty. Do not count every thought. Look for patterns. What receives attention first? What receives it most often? What receives the strongest emotion? What do you revisit after useful action has ended? What do you claim to value but rarely notice? At the end of the day, write 3 sentences. The altar of my attention has been serving. This service has produced. A worthier offering would be, do not choose 10 new offerings, choose 1. Attention becomes powerful through depth, not through a desperate list. Perhaps the worthier offering is guidance. Then begin noticing what clarifies, steadies, corrects, and opens the next step. Perhaps it is provision. Then notice resources, ideas, order, service, support, and circulation. Perhaps it is peace. Then notice every moment the body softens, every pause that becomes available, every place where conflict is not required. Perhaps it is truth. Then notice where performance is exhausting and where honesty produces relief. The altar is never empty. This is not a threat, it is an invitation. You do not have to wait for a perfect mind before beginning. You need only become honest about the current offering and willing to place something else at the center. Your true altar is revealed by what receives your attention when no one is watching. And once the altar is seen, another question appears. Who has been standing at the gate deciding what enters? Chapter 2. The Thieves at the Gate. No one needs to steal your entire future at once. They need only to steal enough of your attention each day. The theft is rarely dramatic. It arrives as a vibration in the pocket, a red symbol on a screen, a headline designed to produce alarm, a short video that leads to another, a request presented as urgent, an opinion that awakens anger, an image that makes your own life appear insufficient. Each event is small. That is why the gate remains open. If a stranger asked for 3 hours of your day, you would demand a reason. If a company asked to enter your home, interrupt your conversations, study your fears, and present messages specifically designed to hold you, you would recognize an invasion. Yet the same access is often granted in fragments, because no single fragment appears valuable enough to defend. The gate is not only the device in your hand, it is the unexamined permission by which anything loud, new, emotional, or socially rewarded may enter consciousness before what is true, necessary, or sacred. The modern world has learned that attention is profitable. What holds the gaze can sell a product, shape an opinion, create a habit, influence a vote, establish a desire, or keep a person returning. This does not require a secret conspiracy. It requires only an economy in which human attention has value and where systems are rewarded for capturing as much of it as possible. The result is a strange reversal. Tools created to serve human purposes begin assigning those purposes. A person opens a device to answer one message and emerges much later carrying emotions they did not have before. They intended to check the weather and found themselves comparing homes, bodies, achievements, tragedies, and beliefs. The screen did not merely provide information. It selected the emotional material of the hour. The first thief at the gate is novelty. The nervous system notices change. A new sound, movement, message, or image may contain information relevant to survival. Digital systems imitate this ancient importance by providing endless novelty. The next item might matter. The next update might resolve uncertainty. The next message might contain approval. The next headline might reveal danger. Because the next object is always arriving, attention never remains long enough for depth. Depth requires continuity. A truth must be held in consciousness long enough to unfold. A book must be entered. A prayer must outlast the first restlessness. A conversation must be allowed to become more honest than its opening sentences. A creative idea must survive the period when it is still unclear. A difficult emotion must be felt long enough to reveal what it protects. Fragmented attention prevents this. It keeps the mind near the surface, constantly beginning and rarely arriving. The second thief is emotional bait. Information that produces fear, anger, disgust, desire, or moral superiority receives stronger attention than information that is balanced and quiet. An ordinary report cannot compete with a catastrophe. A nuanced disagreement cannot compete with an enemy. A useful product cannot compete with a promise that your identity will be transformed by owning it. Emotional bait does not have to be false to be manipulative. A real event may be presented in a manner designed to keep the nervous system activated. A real injustice may be used to produce endless outrage without any path toward action. A real danger may be repeated until the mind experiences the entire world as danger. The problem is not caring. The problem is allowing concern to be converted into perpetual arousal. Concern asks, what is true, what is mine to do, and when is it time to return to life? Outrage addiction asks only for the next object that will justify remaining inflamed. The third thief is comparison. Comparison enters disguised as information. You look at another person's achievement, appearance, relationship, home, health, or freedom. In seconds, attention leaves the reality of your own life and stands inside an edited image of another. The comparison is rarely fair. You compare their visible result with your invisible struggle, their selected moment with your entire history, their strength with the part of you that is tired. The altar is then occupied by a false tribunal. Another person's life becomes the standard before which yours is judged. This can happen even with spiritual content. One person appears peaceful, disciplined, prosperous, and aligned. You do not see their contradictions, debts, fears, or private seasons. You receive an image and allow it to accuse you. A teaching intended to awaken becomes another instrument of self-rejection. The fourth thief is urgency. Urgency enters through work, family, news, and the mind's fear of uncertainty. It says that everything deserves immediate response. It trains you to confuse accessibility with obligation. Because a message can be answered now, it feels as though it must be answered now. Because a problem can be checked again, it feels irresponsible not to check. Urgency fragments the soul by making every outside demand equal to an inner command. The fifth thief is unresolved memory. Not all intruders arrive through technology. Some have lived inside for years. A former conversation enters while you are washing dishes. A humiliation opens its own door. A face appears. An argument resumes without the other person present. Attention is taken by an event that has already received hours, months, or decades. The memory promises resolution if you think about it one more time. Yet no new insight appears. The mind repeats the pain because repetition has become familiar, and familiarity is mistaken for purpose. The sixth thief is anticipatory fear. It lives in the future. It projects scenes and asks the body to react as though they are happening now. It does not wait for evidence. It treats imagination as advance notice. A person can spend an entire day responding physically and emotionally to events that never occur. The future receives the offering before it arrives. Seneca observed that people protect property more carefully than time. He wrote that human beings are often thrifty with possessions and extravagant with the one resource that cannot be restored. His point was not that every hour must become labor. It was that life is given away without an audit. Attention is how time is experienced. To lose attention is to lose the inner possession of time. You may sit in a room for an hour and not inhabit the hour. The body is present, but consciousness is divided among messages, memories, concerns, and images. The clock says you were there. The soul has no clear record of having lived there. This is why distraction creates a peculiar exhaustion. The person may not have completed difficult work, yet feels depleted. Attention was repeatedly moved, reoriented, stimulated, and interrupted. Each shift required energy. Each emotional object left residue. The mind carried many beginnings and few completions. The answer is not to declare war upon technology or withdraw from the world. A gate exists so that a city can receive what it needs. A gate that never opens becomes isolation. A gate that never closes becomes occupation. The work is discernment. Create 3 gates in your mind. The first is the necessary gate. Through it enter responsibilities, information, communication, and realities that genuinely require attention. Bills, appointments, work, health, family, civic awareness, and practical decisions belong here. But necessity must remain specific. One piece of information may be necessary, repetition may not be. The second is the chosen gate. Through it enter books, music, conversation, learning, art, prayer, nature, humor, and experiences that strengthen the life you intend to build. These do not merely entertain, they nourish perception. They remind the mind what else exists. The third is the closed gate. Here you place what repeatedly enters, without producing truth, action, beauty, wisdom, or rest. The closed gate may include compulsive news, online conflict, comparison, surveillance of a former partner, gossip, fear-based content, or communication that treats your availability as public property. Closing the gate does not require hatred. A boundary can be quiet. Turn off a notification. Move an application. Delay opening messages until the morning has been consecrated. Choose a limited time for news. Leave a conversation that survives by feeding resentment. Stop checking whether someone has noticed you. Place the phone outside the room during prayer, reading, meals, or sleep. Small gates restore large territories. There will be discomfort. A mind accustomed to constant entry may interpret silence as absence. You may reach for the device before consciously choosing. You may feel that something important is happening elsewhere. You may become aware of emotions that stimulation had been hiding. Do not confuse this discomfort with evidence that the boundary is wrong. The gatekeeper is waking after a long sleep. The empty moments will initially feel unfamiliar because the thieves filled them. A line, a queue, a quiet meal, a walk, the minutes before an appointment, the darkness before sleep. These moments once offered space for observation, imagination, memory, prayer, and integration. Now they are often treated as defects requiring immediate stimulation. Recover them slowly. Stand in a line without reaching for anything. Feel the feet, observe the room, let thoughts settle. Walk for a few minutes without turning the walk into content. Eat one meal without receiving the emotions of strangers through a screen. Listen to a person without monitoring another conversation at the same time. These are not productivity techniques. They are acts of repossession. Attention also needs a positive assignment. Do not merely remove the thief. Tell the gatekeeper what to welcome. If the mind reaches for alarm in the morning, offer silence, scripture, gratitude, breath, or a written intention. If comparison enters, attend to one responsibility, one gift, or one act of care available in your own life. If outrage calls, decide whether action is possible. If it is, act. If it is not, refuse to let indignation become entertainment. If fear projects the future, return to the next honest task. The gate becomes strong through repetition. Every refusal teaches the mind that urgency is not authority. Every chosen return teaches it that quiet is not emptiness. Every protected period tells the subconscious that your consciousness is not a public square. Ask yourself tonight, Who entered my mind today without permission? What emotional state did they leave behind? What did I open because it was necessary? What did I open because I was restless? What would have become possible if that attention had remained mine? Do not answer with regret. Answer with design. Choose one gate to strengthen tomorrow. Perhaps the first 30 minutes of the morning will belong to no screen. Perhaps meals will be protected. Perhaps one conversation will no longer receive repeated rehearsal. Perhaps the news will be checked once rather than carried all day. Perhaps the final hour before sleep will become a sanctuary rather than a marketplace. No one needs to steal your entire future at once. Enough small thefts will accomplish the same result. But the reverse is also true. You do not need to recover your whole life in one dramatic act. Recover one gate, then 1 hour, then one conversation, then one morning. Attention returns in the same way it was taken, moment by moment. Once the gate becomes visible, you begin to notice another truth. What enters repeatedly does not remain an external visitor. The mind slowly takes on the character of what it beholds. Chapter 3. The mind becomes what it beholds. The mind does not remain separate from what it repeatedly contemplates. It may begin as an observer. It watches a fear, an image, a conflict, a desire, or a possibility. But repeated observation becomes familiarity. Familiarity becomes expectation. Expectation becomes posture. Posture becomes behavior. Eventually, the observer begins to resemble the object that has occupied the gaze. This is easy to see in the body. Imagine receiving a message that says only, "We need to talk." Nothing more has happened. Yet attention begins producing possibilities. The mind searches memory for similar words. It constructs tone where no tone was written. It imagines accusation, loss, embarrassment, or bad news. The body responds to the images. The jaw tightens, the stomach contracts, the breath shortens. A physical state is created around an event that has not yet been interpreted by the person who sent the message. The body follows the gaze of the mind. The same process occurs more slowly when attention is held upon an identity. A person who continually beholds personal failure begins to speak, move, decide, and relate from failure. They become hesitant before opportunities. They interpret uncertainty as evidence. They withdraw before rejection can occur. Then the results of those choices seem to confirm the original identity. The altar has become a workshop. What rests upon it is not merely admired or feared, it is being used as material. William James wrote that the items we notice shape the mind. This shaping is not metaphor alone. Attention determines which experiences are rehearsed, which associations become easier to retrieve, and which interpretations stand ready before events arrive. What is noticed repeatedly develops a privileged path into consciousness. A hunter hears movement in the brush and thinks of game. A frightened person hears the same movement and thinks of danger. A musician hears a sequence others receive as noise. A physician notices signs that remain invisible to an untrained observer. Attention does not only look, it learns what to look for. This is why training matters. The eye becomes educated by what it is repeatedly asked to distinguish. Fear educates the eye toward threat. Gratitude educates the eye toward support. Resentment educates the eye toward offense. Compassion educates the eye toward suffering and need. Ambition educates the eye toward opportunity, status, and comparison. Prayer educates the eye toward meaning, guidance, and presence. None of these educations is neutral. Each creates a world of greater visibility around its object. Consider the person who has become convinced that people are disrespectful. They enter rooms already searching for evidence. A delayed greeting becomes intentional. A distracted expression becomes contempt. A disagreement becomes an attack. Neutral events are placed into an established pattern because the mind has been trained to behold disrespect. This does not mean disrespect never occurs. It means the inner lens may enlarge it, anticipate it, and sometimes help create the very interaction it fears. A guarded tone invites guardedness. Suspicion removes warmth. Defensive speech produces resistance. The person then says, "I knew it," without seeing how attention shaped the dance. Now consider the opposite distortion. A person desperately wants a relationship to be safe. Attention selects every kind gesture and refuses to remain with the pattern of broken promises. Hope becomes selective blindness. The altar is occupied not by truth, but by an image the person cannot bear to lose. Sacred attention is not positive attention at any cost. It is truthful attention governed by life rather than fear. Truth may reveal beauty. Truth may also reveal an ending. Truth may show progress. Truth may also show responsibility. Truth may affirm a desire. Truth may also expose fantasy. The purpose of attention is not to make every object pleasant. It is to see clearly enough that a wise response can emerge. Marcus Aurelius gave himself a severe instruction. Do not say more to yourself than the first impressions report. The discipline is remarkable because the mind almost always adds more. Someone did not reply. That is the first impression. They are rejecting me. That is added. The body hurts today. That is the first impression. My future will be decline. That is added. A payment is late. That is the first impression. I will lose everything. That is added. A person disagreed. That is the first impression. I have been humiliated. That is added. Attention can rest upon the event, or it can become attached to the story generated around the event. The story often produces more suffering than the first fact, yet because both appear in the same mind, they feel equally real. The practice is not emotional coldness, it is separation. What happened? What did I add? What emotion did the addition create? What action does the fact require? What action does the story demand? The fact may require a conversation. The story may demand revenge. The fact may require a medical consultation. The story may demand that you imagine every possible loss. The fact may require a budget. The story may demand shame. The fact may require grief. The story may demand a permanent identity built around grief. When attention learns to separate fact from addition, inner space appears. That space is not emptiness. It is the place where choice returns. The mind also becomes what it beholds through images. Human beings think not only in words but in scenes. A feared conversation is rehearsed. A desired future is pictured. A past humiliation is replayed. These images influence emotion before any spoken sentence is formed. Some people spend years watching the same inner film. They see themselves being left. They see the business failing. They see the body weakening. They see others judging them. They see themselves arriving too late. The scene becomes familiar enough that the nervous system begins treating it as preparation rather than imagination. Choices then move in agreement with the image. A person who continually sees rejection may never make the request. A person who sees failure may delay the work until delay creates failure. A person who sees conflict may enter with the tone that produces it. The image on the altar becomes a silent instruction. This is why inner vision must be examined with the same seriousness as outer content. You may remove a harmful screen and continue watching a harmful film within. The answer is not forced fantasy. It is deliberate rehearsal of a truer possibility. See yourself remaining steady in the conversation. See yourself opening the statement and responding with order rather than panic. See yourself receiving help without shame. See yourself walking into the appointment accompanied by courage. See yourself completing the next step without demanding certainty about the entire road. The purpose is not to command every outcome. It is to train the instrument that will meet the outcome. Attention also shapes memory. The past is not stored as a perfect recording. It is revisited, emphasized, interpreted, and connected to present identity. Each return can strengthen a particular meaning. One person remembers hardship and concludes, "Life has always opposed me." Another remembers the same hardship and concludes, "I have been carried through more than I understood." The events may be identical. The organizing attention is different. This does not justify pain or erase injustice. It determines whether the past will continue producing only injury or will also produce discernment, compassion, boundary, and strength. Ask what your memory has been trained to collect. Does it preserve every insult but lose every kindness? Does it magnify mistakes and dismiss endurance? Does it remember the closed door but forget what the delay protected? Does it record loss without recording what loss revealed? The inner historian can be retrained. Each evening, gather evidence of becoming. Where did you act with greater wisdom? Where did you notice fear without obeying it? Where did you receive support? Where did you correct a word? Where did you offer attention to something that gave life? Where did the day contain mercy that the old mind would have called too small to count? This practice is not sentimental. It changes the archive from which identity is constructed. The person who notices only failure eventually says, I am a failure. The person who notices recovery begins to say, I am becoming someone who returns. The person who notices only abandonment says, I am alone. The person who also notices guidance, friendship, inner strength, and divine presence says, I have known loss, but loss is not the whole field. What you repeatedly notice about yourself becomes the self you are preparing to inhabit. There is a caution here. Do not turn attention into another instrument of self-surveillance. You do not need to inspect every thought with fear. That would place fear upon the altar in the name of removing it. Instead, become interested in direction. Our ship may be moved by wind and current, but the navigator returns to the compass. The important question is not whether the vessel drifted for a moment. It is whether anyone remembers the destination. When you notice the mind beholding what weakens it, do not begin an argument. Name the object, withdraw the light, place the light elsewhere. This is the old film. This is the added story. This is the prosecutor collecting evidence. This is the wound searching for confirmation. Then choose one truthful object, the breath. The next action, a quality you intend to embody, a memory of help, a possibility worth preparing for, a sentence that restores scale. God is nearer than this thought. The mind becomes what it beholds because attention is not a window through which you remain untouched. It is a relationship. What you repeatedly contemplate enters the emotional climate, the body, the language, the memory, and the identity. Therefore, choose carefully what receives long contemplation. Study truth deeply. Study beauty long enough to feel it. Study courage until the body remembers another posture. Study provision as carefully as you once studied lack. Study the places where life has supported you. Study the lessons within the wound without continuing to worship the wound. Study God not only as an idea, but as the presence beneath breath, order, conscience, mercy, and the quiet instruction to return. The altar is shaping the worshipper, and the offering does not remain in the visible chamber of thought. Repeated attention descends. It enters a deeper room where argument grows quiet and instruction becomes root. That room is the subconscious. Chapter 4. The subconscious receives the offering. The subconscious does not receive what you desire once. It receives what you repeatedly offer with feeling. This is why a person can sincerely want peace and remain trained for conflict. The conscious mind forms a wish. The deeper mind receives the repeated atmosphere. One voice says, I want to trust. Another spends the day imagining betrayal. One voice says, I believe provision is possible. Another rehearses loss every time money is mentioned. One voice says, I am ready for healing. Another continually names the body as an enemy and the future as decline. The deeper mind is shaped less by the occasional declaration than by the pattern that returns. Joseph Murphy devoted his work to the relationship between conscious thought and subconscious response. He described the conscious mind as the place where a premise is accepted, and the subconscious as the deeper power that develops the consequences of that premise. The language was spiritual, psychological, and practical at once. His central warning remains severe. The mind below awareness is listening to the assumptions carried by the mind above it. The subconscious is not persuaded by public performance. It knows the private repetition. It receives what you say about yourself after a mistake. It receives the image you return to before sleep. It receives the expectation hidden beneath a prayer. It receives the emotional meaning attached to money, age, love, work, and the body. It receives the stories repeated in the family until they sound like natural law. It receives the atmosphere of the rooms you inhabit, and the voices you replay after those rooms are empty. This is why attention is an offering. It carries material from the visible mind into the invisible workshop. Imagine the subconscious as fertile ground. The ground does not debate the moral quality of every seed. It develops what is planted and watered. A seed of fear can grow because the ground is faithful, not because it is cruel. A seed of trust can grow by the same law. The deeper mind does not punish you by repeating an old pattern. It continues what has been impressed until another pattern receives enough consistency to become familiar. Many old seeds entered before you were able to choose. A child heard that money disappears. A child learned that love requires self-erasure. A child watched adults treat rest as laziness. A child saw that anger controlled the room. A child discovered that being invisible prevented conflict. A child received praise only when useful, quiet, beautiful, strong, or successful. These were not philosophical conclusions. They were emotional impressions. The body learned them before language became precise. Later, the adult called them personality, realism, or fate. The subconscious hides its instructions inside what feels normal. This is one reason transformation feels unnatural at first. A person may choose peace and then feel unsafe when life becomes quiet. The old system recognizes chaos as familiar. A person may receive love and become suspicious because distance once served as protection. A person may earn more and immediately create a crisis because scarcity was tied to belonging, morality, or identity. A person may rest and feel guilt because usefulness became the price of worth. The new state does not fail because it feels unfamiliar. Unfamiliarity is evidence that the deeper mind is being asked to accept a different order. There are three elements that make an offering powerful: repetition, emotion, and identity. Repetition tells the subconscious that the material matters. Emotion tells it that the material is alive. Identity tells it that the material belongs to the self. A passing thought may leave little trace. A thought repeated with fear becomes instruction. A thought joined to the words "I am" becomes a name. I am always overlooked. I am not good with money. I am too old. I am the one who has to hold everything together. I am unlucky in love. I am broken. These sentences do not merely report conditions. They place conditions at the center of identity. The subconscious begins to preserve consistency with the name. Attention searches for evidence. Behavior avoids contradiction. Opportunities that do not fit the identity may be ignored, distrusted, or destroyed. Clean language is therefore part of sacred attention. Clean language does not deny facts. It refuses to turn a fact into a throne. Instead of "I am failing," say, "This attempt has not produced the result yet, and I am learning what must change." Instead of "I am sick," say, "My body is asking for care, wisdom, and restoration." Instead of "I am poor," say, "I am facing a financial condition that requires order, courage, and new circulation." Instead of "I am abandoned," say, "I have experienced loss, but loss is not the name of my being." The revised sentence must be credible enough to enter and powerful enough to redirect. A phrase the whole body rejects may become another performance. Murphy understood that relaxed acceptance often reaches deeper than strained repetition. The mind does not need to shout at the soil. It needs to plant clearly and return faithfully. This is why the moments before sleep and after waking are important. At night, the conscious defenses soften. The day releases its grip. The mind becomes more receptive to image, feeling, and suggestion. Yet, many people use this threshold to rehearse everything they fear. They carry the unpaid bill into darkness. They replay the argument. They scan the body. They imagine the next disappointment. They ask the subconscious to spend the night developing the atmosphere of alarm. Then they wake inside the emotional weather they planted. The final attention of the day becomes a seed placed in darkness. Use the threshold differently. This does not require a long ritual. It requires a clean offering. First, complete what can be completed. Write down tomorrow's task so the mind does not need to hold it. Send the necessary message. Set the appointment. Take the medicine. Close the practical loop where possible. Second, release what cannot be resolved that night. Say inwardly, "I have given this matter the action available today. I refuse to use sleep as a courtroom." Third, recall one evidence of support. It may be small: a meal, a helpful conversation, a body that carried you through the day, a problem that did not become as large as fear predicted, a moment of calm, a place to rest. Fourth, choose one image. Keep it simple. See yourself receiving the next clear step. See the body resting beneath a field of peace. See the bill handled with dignity. See the conversation ending in truth. See yourself waking with strength. Fifth, allow the body to feel the emotional signature of the image. Not wild excitement, relief, gratitude, safety, steadiness. The subconscious receives feeling as evidence that a state is being accepted. Then enter sleep without demanding immediate proof. The practice is not a bargain with God. It is a change in what you are willing to carry into the most receptive chamber of the mind. Morning is the second gate. The first moments after waking often determine the direction of attention before habit gathers momentum. If the phone enters first, the world assigns the object. If worry enters first, the old altar is restored before the body rises. Before receiving anything, offer something. Place a hand upon the chest. Take one slow breath. Speak one clean sentence. Today I'm guided. Today my attention belongs to what builds life. Today provision is visible to me. Today the body is treated as an ally. Today I refuse to enlarge fear. Today God enters before the world. The sentence is not magic because of syllables. It is powerful because it gives attention and assignment. Throughout the day, guard the offering from contradiction. Do not plant peace at dawn and spend the morning consuming conflict as entertainment. Do not plant provision at night and curse every movement of money by day. Do not plant dignity and then speak to yourself with contempt after one mistake. This does not require perfect consistency. It requires correction. When the old sentence appears, say that is the previous instruction. I no longer offer it as law. Then replace it. The act of correction tells the subconscious that a new authority is present. There will be days when both crops appear. Trust in the morning, fear in the afternoon. Gratitude at night, resentment after a message. Calm before a decision, panic when the outcome remains uncertain. Do not call this hypocrisy. It is transition. The old root has depth. The new seed has direction. Continue watering what you have chosen. Attention must also be withdrawn from inner scenes that have become rituals of suffering. Remembering is sometimes necessary. Healing may require returning to an event with support, honesty, and compassion. But there is a difference between remembering to understand and remembering to remain wounded. If the memory produces no new truth, no action, no grief that moves, and no release, ask whether attention is feeding identity rather than healing it. Gather the lesson, name the boundary, honor the loss, then stop placing fresh life upon an event that can no longer use it wisely. The subconscious also receives the emotional climate of relationships. A person may leave a room physically while continuing to hear a critical parent, a fearful spouse, an angry employer, or a former version of the self. The repeated voice becomes an inner authority. Bring the voice into awareness. Whose sentence is this? When did I begin believing it? What did it protect me from? What has it cost? What sentence belongs to the life I am choosing now? A lineage can continue through language without anyone intending harm. Our family always struggles. People like us do not succeed. Good people do not care about money. Love means sacrifice. The body fails after a certain age. You cannot trust anyone. These phrases may have been spoken casually, but repetition gave them the weight of inherited law. One person can interrupt the inheritance by refusing to lend the mouth, imagination, and attention to the old decree. This refusal may feel disloyal. The subconscious often connects sameness with belonging. To prosper where others struggled can feel like betrayal. To rest where others overworked can feel selfish. To receive love where others endured loneliness can awaken guilt. Bless the lineage without repeating the limitation. You can honor the people who survived without making survival the highest future available. You can understand their fear without making it your prayer. You can carry their strength and release their sentence. The practice for this chapter is 7 nights of one offering. Choose a single quality, not a list. Guidance, provision, peace, restoration, courage, truth, divine presence. Before sleep, remove the attention from unresolved noise. Recall one supporting fact. Enter one short inner scene. Feel the state gently. Speak one sentence. Repeat for 7 nights without digging up the seed through constant inspection. During the day, notice what contradicts the offering. Do not become afraid of contradiction. Correct it and continue. At the end of the week, do not ask only whether the external world has changed. Ask whether the inner instrument has begun to change. Did you return more quickly? Did the body soften sooner? Did you notice an option fear would have ignored? Did the old sentence feel less final? Did your morning begin with greater authorship? These are roots. The subconscious receives what conscious attention repeatedly offers. This law has been working before you knew its name. It has developed fear and faith, limitation and strength, resentment and resilience. Now the offering becomes deliberate. But some patterns cannot be redirected by a new sentence alone. The deeper mind may understand the chosen offering, while an older wound continues turning the eyes toward danger. To reclaim the altar fully, you must meet the gaze that was trained by pain. Chapter 5. The wounded gaze. The wound does not control your life only by causing pain. It controls your life by deciding what you continue to notice. A wound changes the assignment given to attention. After betrayal, attention is assigned to detect distance. After humiliation, it is assigned to detect judgment. After abandonment, it is assigned to detect every sign that someone may leave. After financial instability, it is assigned to detect loss before loss arrives. After illness, it is assigned to scan the body for evidence that danger is returning. The assignment begins as protection. The mind says, if I notice the threat early enough, perhaps I will never be surprised again. This is understandable. A nervous system marked by pain does not become vigilant because it enjoys suffering. It becomes vigilant because surprise once felt unbearable. The wounded gaze is an attempt to make the future predictable. But protection that never ends becomes captivity. The person no longer sees the present directly. The past stands behind the eyes and interprets what appears. Carl Jung used the word complex to describe emotionally charged patterns that can gather memories, beliefs, images, and reactions around a central wound. When a complex is activated, it can feel as though a smaller personality has taken command. The adult may know that one delayed message does not prove abandonment, yet the abandoned part reacts before mature judgment arrives. The adult may know that one criticism does not define worth, yet the humiliated part hears a public sentence. The complex selects evidence that supports its world. This is why healing requires more than telling yourself to think positively. The wounded gaze has reasons. It was trained by experience. It must be met with truth, compassion, and new evidence strong enough to revise the assignment. Consider abandonment. A person with an abandonment wound does not simply fear being alone. Attention becomes sensitive to changes in tone, rhythm, availability, and affection. A partner is tired, and the wound sees withdrawal. A friend replies later than usual, and the wound sees replacement. A child becomes independent, and the wound sees loss. The mind begins asking questions that appear reasonable, but are designed to feed the old certainty. Why are they distant? What did I do wrong? Who matters more than I do? What is about to end? Because attention is searching for danger, neutral evidence becomes suspicious and reassuring evidence is treated as temporary. The result can create the feared outcome. The person demands reassurance, reads hidden meanings, tests loyalty, withdraws before being left, or becomes angry at imagined rejection. The relationship begins carrying the weight of an old event it did not create. The wound then says, I was right. But prophecy and participation have become difficult to separate. Now consider humiliation. A person who was mocked, dismissed, or made to feel foolish may enter every room with attention assigned to status. Who is looking? Who is more confident? Did that person disagree because the idea is weak, or because I am weak? Should I remain silent? Should I speak more loudly so no one can diminish me? One wound may produce invisibility, another may produce superiority. Both are organized around the same altar, the fear of being made small. The wounded gaze is not always anxious. It can be angry, controlling, perfectionistic, charming, self-sacrificing, or cold. The outward behavior differs. The inward attention remains captured by what must never happen again. Scarcity creates another form of capture. A person who has known financial fear may be unable to receive money without immediately anticipating its disappearance. Attention moves toward prices, emergencies, debts, comparison, and examples of people who lost everything. Even when resources increase, the inner altar remains dedicated to lack. The person may save wisely, which is stewardship, but they may also become unable to enjoy, give, rest, or trust. Every expense feels like injury. Every blessing is followed by dread. The wound does not permit provision to become emotionally real because danger still receives the stronger gaze. Bodily fear follows a similar pattern. A past diagnosis, accident, painful episode, or loss can teach attention to patrol the body. A sensation is noticed, then checked, then compared, then searched, then checked again. The attention meant to protect becomes a constant signal of danger to the nervous system. This does not mean symptoms should be ignored or that medical care is unnecessary. It means that responsible care and compulsive surveillance are not the same. Responsible care gathers information and acts. Compulsive surveillance keeps the body beneath accusation. The wounded gaze also controls through projection. Projection occurs when something within is experienced, primarily as though it exists outside. A person may be intensely disturbed by another's ambition because their own ambition was forbidden. They may idealize a leader because courage, authority, or vision has been placed entirely in someone else. They may condemn weakness in others because their own need was once shamed. Not every strong reaction is projection. Some people are harmful. Some behavior deserves clear judgment. The purpose is not to dissolve every boundary into self-analysis. The purpose is to notice when the intensity of attention exceeds the present object. Ask, why does this person occupy so much of my mind? What quality do I believe they possess that I do not? What would remain if I removed the moral story and looked only at the emotional charge? What part of myself becomes visible through this reaction? Envy is especially revealing. It can become poison when it wishes to reduce another person, but envy can also be translated. It may point toward an unlived desire, a capacity not yet claimed, or permission you continue to seek from others. The wounded gaze says, their light proves my absence. The healed gaze asks, what possibility in me has their life made visible? Healing the gaze does not begin by forcing it to look away. It begins by understanding what it has been protecting. When fear captures attention, place one hand upon the body and ask, what are you trying to prevent? What happened before that made this vigilance necessary? What evidence belongs to the present rather than the past? What would safety look like now? The answer may be a boundary, not a thought. The answer may be information, not reassurance. The answer may be grief, because attention has been patrolling what the heart never had permission to mourn. The answer may be distance from a person who continues the original harm. The answer may be professional support, rest, prayer, or a difficult conversation. The wound releases attention more readily when it sees that mature authority is present. Say inwardly, I understand why you are watching. You protected me when I had fewer choices, but you are not the only intelligence available now. I can see danger without making danger the center. I can set a boundary without living inside anticipation. I can survive disappointment without rehearsing it in advance. I can receive good without demanding proof that it will never change. This is not sentimental language. It is a transfer of command. The practice of new evidence is essential. A wounded mind often dismisses contradictory experiences because they do not fit the established pattern. The abandonment wound forgets who stayed. The scarcity wound forgets what arrived. The humiliation wound forgets the rooms where dignity was preserved. The bodily fear forgets days of function and relief. Begin recording what the wound ignores. Not to argue that the past was unreal, but to prove that the past is not the only law. Who has been consistent? Where have you been protected? When did a feared outcome fail to occur? Where did you speak and remain whole? What resource appeared after uncertainty? What part of the body continues serving faithfully? What relationship permits truth without punishment? New evidence is not gathered once. It must receive attention long enough to become emotionally meaningful. The wound has had years of repetition. Do not demand that one peaceful moment erase it. Stay with the peaceful moment. Let the body register it. Say, this also belongs to reality. This also happened. This also deserves memory. This also may become familiar. A healed gaze is not naive. It sees danger more accurately because it is not required to see danger everywhere. It recognizes love more clearly because it does not confuse desperation with closeness. It handles money more wisely because fear no longer makes every movement feel like catastrophe. It listens to the body more intelligently because every sensation is not forced to announce a future. The goal is not to remove the wound from your history. It is to remove the wound from the throne. Create a map of capture. Write the object that repeatedly seizes attention. Then write what the attention expects to find. Then identify the earlier experience that trained the expectation. Then list what the wound ignores. Finally, describe what a healed gaze would be willing to notice. For example, the capture is delayed replies. The expectation is abandonment. The training came from unpredictable affection. The ignored evidence is consistency, honest communication, and my own ability to ask directly. The healed gaze would notice the delay without writing the ending. Or, the capture is bodily sensation. The expectation is decline. The training came from a frightening illness. The ignored evidence is medical care, periods of stability and the body's daily repair. The healed gaze would respond wisely without turning every signal into prophecy. This is how the past stops selecting the entire present. Before we continue, take a quiet moment to subscribe if this journey is helping you recognize the forces that have been directing your attention from beneath the surface. Return whenever an old wound tries to convince you that the past is the only truth available to your eyes. The wound may continue speaking. Healing does not require silence from the past. It requires that the past no longer be the only voice allowed to interpret what is seen. You are not betraying your history by noticing something new. You are not dishonoring pain by receiving beauty. You are not becoming careless by releasing vigilance. You are teaching attention that survival is no longer its only purpose. It may also serve truth, love, creation, presence, and God. Once the wounded gaze loosens, the world appears larger. Evidence that was always present begins to enter. Possibilities once hidden become visible. This reveals the next law of the altar. You do not experience the whole world. You experience the world your attention has been trained to reveal. Chapter 6. The world you train yourself to see. You do not experience the whole world. You experience the world your attention has been trained to reveal. This statement is not an excuse to deny circumstances. A storm remains a storm, whether it is welcomed or resisted. A loss remains a loss. Injustice does not disappear because someone looks for beauty. The world has an existence beyond personal preference. Yet the experienced world is never made from events alone. It is made from events, selection, interpretation, memory, expectation, and response. Attention stands at the beginning of that inner construction. Imagine a lens held before the eye. The landscape extends in every direction, but the lens brings one area into focus. What appears inside the circle becomes detailed, near, and emotionally significant. What remains outside may still exist, but it does not guide the next movement. Attention is that lens. It does not create every object. It decides which objects become large enough to influence the life. Epictetus said, "Men are disturbed not by things but by the views which they take of things." This is often repeated as though it means external events do not matter. That is not the deeper lesson. The lesson is that the event enters a second world after it occurs, the world of judgment. Their attention can sustain, enlarge, interpret, and repeat what happened until the judgment becomes more powerful than the original event. A conversation lasts 10 minutes. Attention can make it last 10 years. A financial setback occurs once. Attention can turn it into the permanent expectation of loss. A rejection closes one door. Attention can make every unopened door feel like the same rejection. A bodily symptom appears today. Attention can force the entire imagined future to stand inside it. The view taken of a thing is strengthened by the attention repeatedly given to that view. This is why two people can inhabit the same circumstance and experience different worlds. One loses a position and sees only humiliation, ending, and proof of personal failure. Another grieves the same loss, faces the same practical concerns, but also notices freedom from an exhausted role, skills that remain, relationships that can help, and a direction that was previously ignored. The second person is not spared difficulty. They are spared the belief that difficulty is the only reality available. Attention determines whether possibility is visible. The world is full of possibilities that cannot be used because they are not recognized. An idea passes through conversation. A person offers help indirectly. A pattern in spending becomes clear. A body asks for a change before crisis. A relationship reveals a truth through repeated discomfort. A quiet desire returns. Guidance is present, but the mind trained only for threat does not register it. A person cannot walk through a door they refuse to see. This is why the spiritual life requires a trained gaze. Divine guidance is not always a voice that interrupts natural law. It often moves through perception. Something becomes noticeable. A sentence carries unusual weight. An option once dismissed returns with clarity. A delay reveals protection. A closed path redirects effort. A simple next step appears when the demand for the whole map is released. God may be speaking through what attention has finally become quiet enough to recognize. Consider money. Many people see money almost exclusively through absence. The account is examined for what is not there. Every expense is interpreted as reduction. Every wealthy person becomes evidence of distance. Every opportunity is measured first by the possibility of failure. The lens of lack makes certain truths visible: risk, limitation, waste, and need. These truths matter. But if the lens never moves, other truths remain blurred. Skill is a form of wealth. Order is a form of wealth. Trust is a form of wealth. Health, time, relationship, reputation, knowledge, courage, and the ability to serve are forms of wealth. A useful idea may be a seed of wealth. A conversation may become a channel of wealth. A boundary may stop a leak. A decision to learn may change future circulation. When attention expands from lack toward stewardship, money becomes a field of relationship rather than a verdict upon worth. The practical facts do not disappear. They become part of a larger field in which action is possible. Now consider the body. Fear can train the lens to notice only what hurts, weakens, or changes. The body is then experienced as a collection of threats. Even healthy functions become invisible because they are ordinary. Breath continues. Digestion works, wounds close, muscles respond, senses receive, and sleep repairs. Yet attention studies only the part that appears uncertain. A sacred gaze does not ignore symptoms. It gives symptoms appropriate attention while also noticing life. What still works? What has improved? What does the body need rather than what does it deserve? What conditions make it feel safer? What care has been delayed? What pleasure, movement, nourishment, and rest remain possible? The body changes under the quality of relationship. A body treated as an enemy lives in a different atmosphere from a body treated as a sacred instrument. This does not guarantee a particular outcome. It changes the person who meets the outcome. Relationships are also shaped by trained attention. When a relationship has known conflict, the mind becomes efficient at recognizing what is wrong. Tone, timing, habit, and omission are studied. The person becomes a specialist in the other's failure. Sometimes this specialization is necessary because denial protected a harmful pattern. But when truth has been faced and repair is possible, attention may need a new assignment. It must learn to notice effort, change, honesty, and the moments when the old pattern is not repeated. No relationship can become new if attention permits only old evidence to count. At the same time, hope cannot be used to overlook repeated harm. The trained gaze must be honest enough to recognize both progress and pattern. Sacred attention is balanced because it serves truth rather than a desired conclusion. Time presents another field. Some people look backward and see only what was lost. Years given to work, a marriage that ended, opportunities declined, a body that changed, a dream delayed. Attention becomes an accountant of absence. Others look at the remaining years and see only limitation. Too late to learn, too late to love, too late to begin, too late to become visible. But time is not only what has passed, time is also what is receiving attention now. One fully inhabited hour can contain more life than a day spent moving through mental absence. The remaining years do not need to be numerous to become deep. The lens can stop measuring life only by quantity and begin recognizing presence, meaning, service, and truth. The world you see depends partly on the questions attention has been trained to ask. Why does this always happen to me? The mind searches for repetition and helplessness. What is this revealing? The mind searches for pattern and instruction. What am I about to lose? The mind searches for threat. What is mine to protect and what is mine to release? The mind searches for responsibility. Why is no one helping me? The mind searches for absence. Where has help already appeared, and what help must I now request? The mind searches for support and agency. Questions are assignments to attention. Choose them carefully. The practice for this chapter is 7 days of intentional evidence. Choose one quality that you believe is absent or insufficient in your life. Support, guidance, provision, beauty, truth, restoration, meaningful timing. Do not spend the week demanding dramatic proof. Train the lens to notice small evidence. Support may be a person who answers, a chair that holds you, a road that functions, a body part that serves, or a resource you had forgotten. Guidance may be an idea, a discomfort, a clear no, a repeated invitation, or the realization that one option no longer deserves energy. Provision may be food, work, skill, an unexpected discount, useful knowledge, an introduction, or the strength to organize what remains. Beauty may be light on a wall, music, a face, an old tree, a clean room, or the quiet order of a simple task. At night, record 3 pieces of evidence. Then remain with each for a few breaths. Do not merely list. Let attention give the evidence emotional weight. The old mind may object that the signs are too small. It has been trained to recognize only dramatic danger and dramatic rescue. Ignore the demand for spectacle. Small evidence changes the field because it teaches perception what else is real. A person who notices one moment of peace begins to recognize the conditions that created it. A person who notices one act of courage begins to revise identity. A person who notices one channel of provision becomes more capable of stewardship. A person who notices one form of guidance becomes more willing to listen. The lens is being adjusted. There is also a discipline of scale. Fear brings one object so close that it fills the entire field. A problem becomes the whole life. A person becomes the whole emotional world. A symptom becomes the whole body. An opinion becomes the whole identity. Step back. This problem is real, but it is not the whole field. This grief is real, but life still contains other forms of relationship. This uncertainty is real, but the next action remains available. This person has power in one area, but does not own the sanctuary. This season is difficult, but it is not eternity. Scale is restored when attention remembers context. The spiritual declaration is not that nothing can harm you. It is that no single condition deserves to become the definition of the entire universe within you. The world you train yourself to see becomes the world you are prepared to enter. If you train attention only toward threat, you will move defensively even when an opening appears. If you train attention toward truth, you will recognize both danger and possibility. If you train attention toward grace, you will begin seeing that support often arrives in forms the frightened mind once dismissed as ordinary. If you train attention toward God, the world will no longer appear empty simply because it is quiet. But this training faces a powerful enemy. It is not always fear, sometimes it is speed. A gaze cannot become clear while the mind is rushing past everything it claims to value. The next altar we must confront is the religion of urgency. Chapter 7. The religion of urgency. Urgency is the religion of a mind that has forgotten eternity. It has its own commandments. Respond immediately. Move faster. Check again. Do not rest while anything remains unresolved. Do not trust silence. Do not allow another person to misunderstand you. Do not let the future arrive without rehearsing every possible disaster. The commandments are rarely spoken aloud, yet many people obey them from the moment they wake. The body rises already behind. The mind enters the day as though it has missed an appointment with life. Every task becomes evidence of insufficiency. Every interruption becomes an enemy. Every pause becomes guilt. Urgency feels responsible because it is active. It resembles discipline from a distance, but discipline has direction. Urgency has acceleration. A disciplined person can move quickly when speed is required and slowly when depth is required. An urgent person moves quickly because slowing down would expose the fear beneath the movement. The fear may be that everything will collapse. The fear may be that another person will become disappointed. The fear may be that rest will reveal emptiness. The fear may be that if the mind stops preparing, pain will arrive unannounced. Urgency is often control wearing the clothing of duty. It says, "If I remain mentally ahead of every possibility, I will be safe." But the future cannot be made safe through constant rehearsal. The rehearsal only asks the body to live through danger before danger exists. A person may spend the entire morning preparing emotionally for a conversation that becomes simple. They may lose sleep over a result that arrives differently. They may hurry through a meal, a drive, and time with family because the mind is already serving the next demand. When the next demand arrives, attention moves again. The person is always approaching life and rarely inhabiting it. Seneca wrote with astonishment about people who guard property, but allow others to take possession of their existence. He saw men giving away the substance of life while imagining that life would begin later, after business, ambition, duty, and social demands had finally loosened their grip. The ancient warning has become more severe. It is now possible to carry the demands of the marketplace, the office, the crowd, and the world into every room. There is no natural closing of the gate. Work follows the worker home. News follows the citizen into bed. Comparison follows the person into private moments. Other people's urgency arrives at any hour and presents itself as access. A life can disappear while appearing highly responsive. Urgency destroys attention in three ways. First, it makes everything equal. A meaningful conversation and a trivial notification both become interruptions. A long-term calling and an immediate request both demand the same nervous system. The urgent mind loses hierarchy because whatever is nearest or loudest becomes most important. Second, urgency prevents completion. The mind moves before experience can be integrated. A task ends, but attention does not register satisfaction. A conversation closes, but the mind is already entering another. A prayer is spoken, but the silence in which it might be received is abandoned. Third, urgency corrupts interpretation. A hurried mind fills gaps with fear. It responds before context arrives. It mistakes intensity for guidance and delay for danger. It cannot distinguish what is important from what merely produces arousal. This is why divine guidance is often experienced as absent when attention is hurried. God may not be silent. The mind may be too fast to receive what does not shout. Guidance rarely flatters panic. It does not always provide the entire map. It may offer one clean step. Wait, speak, leave, rest, call, apologize. Do not send the message yet. Return to the work. The instruction is often simple. Urgency rejects it because simplicity does not satisfy the demand for complete control. A hurried mind asks, but what happens after that? Guidance answers, take the step that is yours. Urgency also changes relationships. It makes listening difficult because the mind is preparing a reply. It turns another person's emotion into a problem to be solved quickly. It produces explanations before understanding. It sends messages that would have changed after 10 quiet minutes. Many wounds are not created by malice. They are created by speed. A person hears criticism and answers from defense before discerning whether the criticism contains truth. A parent sees a child struggle and rushes to rescue before the child discovers capacity. A partner feels distance and demands closeness before understanding what the distance is asking. A leader receives bad news and spreads anxiety before gathering facts. One breath could have allowed a wiser self to enter. The practice of sacred delay is therefore an act of attention. Delay does not mean avoidance. It means refusing to let the first emotional movement become the final authority. When a difficult message arrives, read it once. Feel what rises. Do not immediately build an argument. Ask what the first impression actually reports. Separate the words from what fear added. Decide whether the response must happen now. When an impulse to check appears, wait a few minutes. Notice the discomfort. Ask what certainty you believe the checking will provide. When a request is made, do not give an automatic yes to escape the discomfort of disappointing someone. Say, let me consider it. When a decision feels urgent but no real deadline exists, sleep before deciding. Time often reveals whether a movement came from guidance or panic. Guidance may remain firm after the emotional storm has lowered. Panic changes shape, adds catastrophe, and demands immediate relief. This does not mean that guidance always feels calm. Sometimes it is strong. Sometimes it requires immediate action. A person in danger should not meditate upon boundaries while harm continues. A medical emergency requires speed. An ethical moment may require courage now. The difference is quality. True urgency is specific, it says, act here. False urgency is atmospheric. It says everything is dangerous unless you remain tense. To break the religion of urgency, establish 3 silences. The first is silence before the world. Protect a brief period after waking. Do not allow messages, news, or obligations to name the day before the soul has entered it. Sit, breathe, pray, read, write, or look through a window. Decide what deserves attention before the world begins bidding for it. This silence may last 10 minutes or longer. Its power does not depend on duration alone, it depends on ownership. The second is silence before response. Create a small interval between stimulus and speech. 1 breath may be enough. In that breath, ask, what happened? What am I feeling? What story am I adding? What response belongs to the person I choose to be? The interval is the doorway through which freedom enters. The third is silence before sleep. Do not carry every unfinished matter into the night. The day will always leave something incomplete. If completion were required before rest, no human being would sleep in peace. Write down what must be remembered. Offer what cannot be resolved. Turn off the stream of new demands. Let the final attention of the day belong to gratitude, trust, prayer, beauty, or the simple fact that you were carried through another day. There is also the discipline of one thing. Urgency divides attention because it believes doing several things at once creates more life. Often it creates less presence in each. Choose one task and remain until a natural point of completion. When reading, read. When speaking, speak. When resting, rest. When praying, pray. When handling money, handle money rather than also rehearsing shame. When caring for the body, do not turn the act into punishment or comparison. One thing done with full attention restores the nervous system's trust in continuity. You may discover that slowness is initially uncomfortable. The mind produces forgotten concerns. The body expects interruption. Silence exposes grief, fatigue, desire, and questions that activity kept below the surface. This is why people sometimes remain busy even when no task requires it. Busyness protects them from the room within. Enter the room gently. The grief that rises may need tears. The fatigue may need real rest rather than stimulation. The desire may need a decision. The emptiness may be the space in which a new life can finally speak. Do not rush to fill what sacred attention has uncovered. The goal is not to become slow in every external movement. It is to become inwardly unhurried. A surgeon may act quickly with a quiet mind. A parent may respond immediately without panic. A leader may make a fast decision without surrendering judgment. Inner hurry is the belief that peace must wait until everything is controlled. Inner stillness is the recognition that peace is the condition from which control becomes less necessary and wise action becomes more available. Ask at different moments of the day, am I moving with purpose or fleeing discomfort? Is this truly urgent, or has anxiety given it a false crown? What becomes visible if I slow down by one breath? What am I sacrificing to finish faster? The answers may change how you use the remaining hours. The religion of urgency promises that salvation exists after the next task, the next answer, the next amount of money, the next resolution, the next season. It keeps the soul worshipping a future that never arrives, because every arrival immediately becomes another departure. Break the spell by inhabiting one moment completely. Drink the water, hear the person, feel the feet upon the floor. Finish the sentence. Receive the light entering the room. Let one ordinary act become enough for the attention it requires. A hurried mind cannot distinguish fear from guidance. A quiet mind may still face uncertainty, but it no longer mistakes movement for wisdom. Once speed loses its authority, another truth becomes clear. Many invasions continue not because they are powerful, but because the person has never learned the sacred use of refusal. The altar cannot be protected by welcome alone. It must also be protected by no. Chapter 8. The discipline of sacred refusal. Every sacred life is built not only by what it welcomes, but by what it refuses to worship. There are thoughts that will continue returning as long as they are granted an audience. There are conversations that survive only because someone keeps supplying emotional energy. There are people who remain powerful long after leaving because attention still reports to them each day. There are fears that have never been tested against reality because the mind obeys them before truth can speak. The word no is therefore not merely social, it is spiritual. No is the gate closing before an unworthy object reaches the altar. No to one more rehearsal of the insult. No to checking whether someone who rejected you has changed their mind. No to consuming fear in the name of being informed. No to turning another person's emergency into the permanent climate of your body. No to explaining a boundary to someone who benefits from misunderstanding it. No to giving the first hour of consciousness to strangers. No to making one difficult fact the definition of the entire future. Many people fear refusal because they confuse openness with goodness. They believe a compassionate person should remain available, receptive, informed, forgiving, and responsive at all times. But openness without discernment is not love. It is exposure. A home without walls cannot offer shelter. A body without skin cannot remain alive. A mind without refusal cannot preserve a sacred center. This is not a teaching of isolation. The purpose of a boundary is not to prevent relationship. It is to make truthful relationship possible. Attention that has been drained cannot listen deeply. A person who says yes while inwardly resenting the yes is not giving cleanly. A mind filled with other people's demands cannot hear its own responsibility clearly. Sacred refusal begins with impressions. An impression is the first movement produced by what appears. A face, a message, a memory, a tone, a sensation, or an image enters. The mind immediately offers interpretation. The Stoics understood that freedom depends upon not granting automatic agreement to every impression. A thought may knock without being invited to remain. This is a radical distinction. The arrival of a thought is not consent. The presence of fear is not prophecy. The rise of anger is not a command. The image of failure is not an instruction. A memory entering consciousness does not mean the day belongs to it. The untrained mind treats appearance as authority. The trained mind says, "I see you. Now I will examine what you are." When a thought arrives, ask, is this fact, prediction, memory, or habit? Does it require action? Does it contain instruction? Does it deserve more of my life? If the answer is no, refusal can be simple. I will not continue this argument. I will not use imagination to harm the body. I will not make a temporary condition into an identity. I will not search for evidence against myself. I will not pray to the wound by revisiting it without purpose. The thought may return. Refusal is not proven by one dismissal. It becomes authority through repeated non-cooperation. At first, the old pattern may intensify. A habit deprived of attention often calls more loudly. The urge to check becomes stronger. The mind creates reasons. Perhaps something has changed. Perhaps one more look will bring closure. Perhaps remaining informed is responsible. Perhaps refusing to worry means you do not care. This is the bargaining stage of attention. Do not argue endlessly. Return to the decision. A closed gate does not debate every traveler. Sacred refusal is also required in conversation. Some conversations clarify, connect, teach, repair, and reveal. Others survive by repeating complaint, gossip, accusation, and helplessness. They do not move toward action or understanding. They create emotional weather and invite everyone present to live beneath it. You may care for a person without joining every cycle. You may say, "I hear that this is painful. What action are you considering? I am willing to discuss the problem, but not to attack the person. I cannot continue this conversation while we are speaking this way. I do not have the capacity for this tonight. I love you and I need time before responding." These sentences protect attention without denying relationship. There are people who may resist the new boundary because they were accustomed to entering without permission. Their disappointment does not prove the boundary is wrong. Sometimes another person's discomfort is the first visible evidence that your attention no longer belongs to the old arrangement. The deepest refusals are often private, refusing the need to be understood by everyone, refusing to measure worth through usefulness, refusing to keep a role because others recognize you inside it, refusing to make guilt the price of rest, refusing to carry responsibility that belongs to another adult, refusing to remain spiritually loyal to a family sentence of suffering. These refusals may not produce applause. They may look ordinary from the outside. Yet the inner altar changes when a person stops feeding the identity that kept it occupied. Resentment requires a particular form of refusal. Resentment often feels justified because something unjust occurred. The mind believes that continued attention keeps the moral truth alive. It rehearses the event so the offender is never allowed to escape judgment. But the offender may not be present. The body is present. The body receives the tension. The current day is present. The current day is sacrificed. Releasing resentment does not declare the harm acceptable. It refuses to make the nervous system a permanent courtroom. You may pursue justice, maintain distance, speak truth, or end contact, but after the necessary action, attention must be returned from the one who has already taken enough. Say, the lesson remains, the bond of attention ends. The boundary remains, the inner trial ends. The truth remains. The daily offering ends. This is forgiveness as eviction, not permission. Sacred refusal also applies to desire. Not every desire deserves the altar merely because it is intense. Some desires are wounds asking to be seen through an object. The person believes a relationship, achievement, amount of money, or recognition will finally prove worth. Attention becomes fixed upon the form. Life is postponed until the form arrives. Ask what the desire is being asked to provide. Safety? Status? Belonging? Revenge? Rest? Permission to exist? The form may still be worthy, but it cannot carry the burden of becoming your God. Desire becomes clean when it can be pursued without surrendering peace, dignity, or the present. The practical discipline for this chapter is a 7-day fast from one attentional leak. Choose one. Compulsive news. Checking a person's activity. Imagined arguments. Comparison. Fearful body scanning beyond responsible care. Repeated financial checking after action is complete. Gossip. Self-accusation after mistakes. Do not choose the largest problem if it will make the practice impossible. Choose a leak you can observe clearly. When the urge appears, do 3 things. Name it. This is the urge to seek certainty. This is the urge to reopen the wound. This is the urge to borrow another person's life. Refuse it. Not now. This does not deserve another offering. Replace it. Turn toward breath, prayer, a page, a walk, a task, a person in the room, music, silence, or one action that builds the life you claim to value. Replacement matters because attention needs direction. A vacuum invites the old object back. At the end of each day, record what returned when the leak was closed. Perhaps time appeared, perhaps grief appeared, perhaps boredom, creativity, fatigue, or a forgotten desire became visible. The leak may have been hiding the very thing the soul needs to address. Do not rush to remove the new feeling. Attend to it with honesty. If grief appears, let grief speak. If fatigue appears, change the rhythm. If desire appears, ask what form of life has been postponed. If emptiness appears, remain long enough to discover whether emptiness is actually space. Whatever you cannot refuse will eventually rule you. This includes the demand to improve constantly. Even spiritual teachings can become another source of pressure. A person consumes book after book, lesson after lesson, and never remains with one truth long enough to embody it. Attention becomes addicted to revelation and resistant to practice. Refuse the next idea when the current idea has not entered life. Return to one teaching. Guard the morning. Separate fact from story. Withdraw attention after action. Offer one clean image before sleep. Practice one refusal. Depth transforms what novelty merely excites. A sacred no protects the altar for a greater yes. Yes to presence. Yes to truth. Yes to the people actually before you. Yes to work that deserves depth. Yes to rest that restores the instrument. Yes to God without the noise of constant demand. When refusal has cleared the sanctuary, attention becomes capable of its highest expression. It no longer serves only concentration, protection, or choice. It becomes prayer. Chapter 9. Attention as prayer. Prayer begins before words. It begins with what the soul is willing to attend to completely. Many people imagine prayer as speech directed toward God. They ask, thank, confess, praise, and seek guidance. Words can become sacred vessels, but words without attention are empty vessels. The mouth may be praying while the mind is standing in several other rooms. The lips say, give me peace. Attention is examining the problem again. The lips say, I trust you. Attention is rehearsing the feared outcome. The lips say, thank you. Attention is already moving toward what remains missing. The prayer is not false because the mind wanders. Wandering is human, but a divided prayer reveals that the deepest offering has not yet joined the spoken request. This is why attention is the substance of prayer. Simone de Weil saw attention as a radical openness, a suspension of the self's usual demands so that another person, a truth or God, could be received without being immediately reduced to our own projections. Her insight was not about concentration as force, it was about availability. To attend is to say, for this moment I will not require reality to become what I already assume. I will become quiet enough to receive what is here. This is one of the purest spiritual disciplines, because the ego prefers to speak, classify, predict, defend, and possess. Attention asks the ego to wait. When you listen to another person with complete attention, you temporarily stop making their words material for your own response. You allow their reality to exist. You hear the sentence, the silence, the fear beneath anger, the need beneath explanation. You do not disappear. You do not agree with everything. You become present enough for truth to have room. This is prayerful listening. Attention also carries an ethical weight, because what we refuse to notice can be harmed without resistance. A person may speak of love in general while never becoming present to the particular human being before them. They may care about humanity and ignore the exhausted face at the table. They may defend truth in public and refuse to hear truth from someone whose experience disturbs their self-image. Abstraction is easier than attention. It is easier to love a category than a person, because a category does not interrupt, disagree, need time, or reveal our limitations. A real person arrives with a voice, history, contradiction, and dignity that cannot be fully controlled. To attend to them is to allow their existence to place a demand upon our comfortable conclusions. This is why the gift of attention is so rare. Advice can be given quickly. Money can be offered without intimacy. A solution can be proposed before the problem is understood. Attention requires that the giver remain present long enough to be changed by what is received. A grieving person may not need an explanation of divine timing. They may need someone who can remain near sorrow without trying to shorten it. An aging parent may not need every weakness corrected. They may need to be addressed as a full human being whose history is larger than the care they now require. A child may not need an immediate lesson. They may need an adult who listens long enough to discover the fear hidden beneath behavior. A partner may not need reassurance given automatically. They may need the truth that only careful listening can uncover. Attention does not always lead to comfort. Sometimes it reveals that help has become control, that pity has preserved distance, or that generosity has been used to purchase importance. We may discover that we listen only when the other person confirms our role as wise, needed, or good. The moment they reject our advice, attention disappears and offense takes its place. Prayerful attention asks a more difficult question. Can I remain present to another person without requiring their experience to prove something about me? This does not mean becoming endlessly available. Ethical attention includes the truth of your own limits. To listen resentfully while the body is depleted is not holiness. To absorb repeated abuse is not compassion. To make yourself responsible for another adult's choices is not presence. Clear attention sees the person and also sees the boundary. Sometimes the most truthful response is, "I hear your pain and I cannot carry this decision for you." Sometimes it is, "I care about what happens and I will not remain in a conversation that becomes harmful." Sometimes it is, "I do not know how to help, but I am willing to sit here." Sometimes it is, "This requires support beyond what I can provide." Attention without boundaries becomes possession. Boundaries without attention become indifference. Love needs both. There is also a moral discipline in noticing people the world has trained us to overlook. The worker whose labor makes comfort possible. The older person whose slowness is treated as inconvenience. The quiet person in the room. The one whose service is noticed only when it fails. The person reduced to a role, diagnosis, age, class, or mistake. To look carefully is to restore complexity. No human being is only the function they perform or the wound they carry. Attention returns the person from category to presence. This does not require dramatic action. Use a name. Meet the eyes. Listen to the answer after asking how someone is. Thank the person whose work has become invisible through familiarity. Notice who is repeatedly interrupted. Notice whose needs are assumed to matter less. These acts do not solve every injustice. They change the consciousness through which justice becomes possible. What remains unseen rarely receives protection. What is attended to can enter responsibility. The altar of attention is therefore not only about creating your own experience, it is also about the kind of world your gaze helps sustain. A gaze trained only upon personal gain will miss suffering. A gaze trained only upon suffering may miss beauty and become unable to serve. Sacred attention holds truth, without allowing one part of truth to erase the rest. It sees the wound and the dignity. It sees the need and the capacity. It sees the person and the boundary. It sees what is broken and what is still alive. This balance is prayer because it refuses both denial and despair. It gives reality enough presence to reveal what love actually requires. When you attend to the body without contempt, you allow the body to speak before naming it weak, inconvenient, aging, or broken. A sensation may ask for rest, movement, nourishment, help, grief, or less fear. The body is not always correct in its alarm, but it deserves to be heard before being sentenced. This is prayerful embodiment. When you attend to a task without resentment, the task becomes more than an obstacle between you and a future moment, Washing a cup, preparing food, repairing a chair, answering a letter, organizing a drawer, or walking to the door can become acts of presence. The ordinary object receives care. The person performing the act returns to the life actually being lived. This is prayerful work. The sacred does not enter ordinary life only through extraordinary emotion. It is recognized when attention stops abandoning the ordinary. Eckhart Tolle has repeatedly pointed toward the difference between thought and presence. Thought speaks about reality. Presence receives reality before commentary occupies it. This does not make thought an enemy. Thought is a tool. The difficulty begins when the tool becomes the only place the person lives. Many people do not experience the morning. They experience thoughts about the morning. They do not experience a loved one. They experience judgments, expectations, and memories about the loved one. They do not experience the body. They experience a mental story about age, appearance, or danger. They do not experience prayer. They experience an evaluation of whether prayer is working. Attention as prayer returns from commentary to contact. Feel the breath before naming it shallow or deep. Hear the sound before deciding whether it is pleasant. See the face before retrieving the file of previous conversations. Receive the moment before asking what it will produce. This is not passivity. Clear action becomes more possible when reality is received before fear completes the story. There is a difference between thinking of God and attending to God. Thinking of God may involve doctrine, memory, image, or concept. These have value. But attending to God is a movement of presence. It may begin with silence. You sit without trying to manufacture a spiritual feeling. You notice that breath is already occurring, life is already being sustained, awareness is already present. You become receptive to a source that does not need your anxiety in order to exist. God is not made present by your attention. Your attention makes you present to God. This is why silence can be prayer even when no answer is heard. The value is not only in receiving information, it is in becoming available to a deeper order than the compulsive mind. The ego often resists this because it wants prayer to provide control. It wants a guarantee, a timetable, a sign, or an explanation. It asks with one hand and grips the outcome with the other. Attention as prayer opens the hand. It says, "This is what I desire. This is what I fear. This is what I can do. This is what I cannot command." I place the matter before a wisdom larger than my rehearsal. Then attention withdraws from obsessive checking. This final movement is essential. Many people pray and immediately return to inspecting whether the answer has appeared. The prayer becomes another form of anxiety. The seed is planted and then dug up every hour. A completed prayer includes release. You may return to the matter for action. You may need to call, prepare, ask, work, seek treatment, set a boundary, or wait. But the mind no longer needs to keep the matter upon the altar every free moment. Prayer is not proven by constant mental possession. There are 5 forms of attention as prayer that can restore the inner altar. The first is the prayer of one object. Choose something simple. A candle, a leaf, a cup, the movement of breath, the light upon a wall. Remain with it for several minutes. Notice color, texture, shape, shadow, movement. When the mind leaves, return without irritation. The object is not worshipped. It is used to train presence. The practice reveals how quickly the mind abandons what is here for what is imagined. Each return is a small act of devotion. The second is the prayer of listening. Choose one conversation and enter it without preparing your response while the other person speaks. Notice the urge to interrupt, correct, advise, compare, or escape. Let the person complete the thought. Ask one honest question before offering your own view. This prayer may reveal that many relationships have been exchanges of reaction rather than encounters. True listening does not require agreement. It requires enough inner space for another reality to become visible. The third is the prayer of work. Take one ordinary task and refuse to treat it as beneath your spirit. Give it full attention. Feel the hands, notice the sequence, complete the movement. If resentment appears, ask what story makes this act unworthy. A floor cleaned with presence can become more spiritually transformative than a profound idea consumed without embodiment. The act teaches order, care, humility, and completion. The fourth is the prayer of gratitude. Do not list many things quickly. Choose one mercy, water, shelter, a person, a functioning hand, a moment of relief, a lesson received through difficulty. Give it full attention until gratitude moves from language into the body. Notice what changes in the chest, breath, face, and posture. Gratitude becomes prayer when the gift is actually received. The fifth is the prayer of release. Bring one unresolved matter to awareness. State the fact clearly. Name the fear, name the action already taken, name the next action if one exists. Then say, I refuse to keep this problem alive through unnecessary attention. What is mine to do will become clear. What is not mine to command, I release to God. Place the matter down physically if helpful. Write it on paper. Fold the paper. Put it in a box or drawer. The ritual gives the body a visible act of surrender. When the mind returns, remind it. This matter has been placed. I will retrieve it when action is required. Attention as prayer also changes how suffering is met. When someone is in pain, the ordinary impulse is to fix, explain, compare, or escape. Full attention may be more difficult than advice because it asks you to remain near what you cannot control. To sit with a grieving person and not rush their grief is prayer. To look at someone who has been ignored and allow their dignity to become visible is prayer. To care for an aging body without treating the person as a burden is prayer. To listen to your own sorrow without turning it into shame is prayer. Attention gives existence. It says, you are here and I will not look away merely because your reality makes me uncomfortable. This does not mean absorbing every pain. Sacred attention includes boundaries. You can be present without becoming responsible for another person's entire life. You can listen without allowing repeated crisis to consume the sanctuary. Prayerful attention sees the other clearly enough to recognize both compassion and limit. There is also prayerful attention to beauty. Beauty is not decoration. It interrupts the belief that life is only a problem to solve. A tree, music, a child's laughter, an old face, sunlight, craftsmanship, color, order, and silence remind the mind that existence contains meaning beyond utility. The anxious mind often considers beauty irresponsible. It says there are more important things to think about, yet a life in which beauty receives no attention becomes emotionally starved. The soul cannot live only on warnings. Give beauty enough attention to become real. Do not photograph everything immediately. See it first. Do not turn every experience into evidence for others. Let some moments remain private between your awareness and God. This privacy restores reverence. Attention as prayer changes the meaning of concentration. Concentration is no longer merely the ability to hold the mind upon a task. It becomes the ability to offer yourself without fragmentation to a person, to a truth, to a responsibility, to a moment, to God. This kind of attention is love organized through presence. It also reveals why distraction can become spiritually dangerous. A constantly divided mind may still believe, pray, and speak sacred language, but it loses the capacity to receive depth. The inner soil is touched by many impressions and penetrated by none. Therefore, create one daily sanctuary of undivided attention. It may be prayer in the morning, a walk without a device, a meal received slowly, a page read deeply, a conversation protected from interruption, a task completed with care. Do not measure the sanctuary by duration alone. Measure it by whether you are actually there. When the mind wanders, return. The return is not proof of failure, it is the prayer becoming conscious. Over time, the boundary between prayer and life begins to soften. You no longer wait for a formal moment to become present. Attention enters the bill, the ache, the door, the meal, the difficult sentence, and the silence before response. The whole day becomes a temple, because the mind is no longer abandoning every ordinary chamber. What receives complete attention becomes a doorway into presence. A distracted prayer asks God to enter a room the mind refuses to inhabit. An attentive life discovers that God was already within the room, waiting for the person to arrive. But attention cannot remain only a collection of practices. It must become an identity, a way of moving through the world. The final chapter will return to the altar and ask who you are becoming as its guardian. Chapter 10. The life that answers your gaze. Your future is built first by what you allow to remain upon the inner altar. Not because attention gives you absolute control over every event, but because no future can be entered except through the consciousness you carry toward it. The same opportunity appears different to a mind trained by fear than to a mind trained by possibility. The same delay becomes abandonment in one consciousness and preparation in another. The same responsibility becomes punishment to one person and stewardship to another. Attention does not merely reveal a world, it prepares the self that will meet the world. This is why the final task is not to become a person who never loses focus. It is to become the guardian who remembers what the altar is for. A guardian does not panic each time something approaches the gate. A guardian observes, recognizes, admits, refuses, redirects, and returns. The work is quiet. Much of it is invisible. No one applauds when you refuse to reopen an old wound. No one knows when you put down the phone and protect 10 minutes of silence. No one sees the moment you stop one sentence before it becomes self-condemnation. Yet these invisible acts change the architecture of the life. The first change is in perception. You begin to notice the difference between what appears and what fear adds. An unanswered message is no longer an entire story. A difficult morning is no longer a prophecy. A critical opinion is no longer a permanent definition. The world becomes more specific. Specific problems can be handled. Totalized fear cannot. The second change is in emotion. Emotions still arise, but they no longer receive automatic worship. Anger may reveal a boundary. Grief may reveal love. Fear may reveal uncertainty or an old memory. Envy may reveal desire. Shame may reveal a standard that needs examination. The emotion becomes information rather than identity. The third change is in the body. The nervous system begins to experience moments when attention is not constantly announcing danger. The breath deepens sooner. The shoulders release. Sleep is no longer entered through a courtroom. The body becomes less like a territory under surveillance and more like an instrument being cared for. The fourth change is in speech. Words become cleaner because attention catches the atmosphere before it reaches the mouth. You notice when you are about to curse the body, the future, money, another person, or yourself. You do not become artificially pleasant. You become precise. This is difficult but not final. This person acted harmfully, but they do not own my inner world. This account requires order, but it does not define my value. This body needs care, but I will not call it my enemy. This fear is present, but it is not the voice of God. The fifth change is in behavior. A new object of attention makes new action visible. When provision is observed, stewardship becomes possible. When dignity is observed, boundaries become possible. When guidance is observed, the next step becomes possible. When grace is observed, gratitude becomes possible. The life begins answering the gaze because the gaze is preparing different choices. Consider money again. The old attention sees only the number and reacts with contraction. The renewed attention sees the number, the obligations, the available resources, the habits that created leaks, the skills that can be developed, the people who may need what you can offer, and the fear that must no longer govern the relationship. The renewed gaze does not guarantee wealth through thought alone. It makes you available to the order, courage, creativity, service, and decisions through which provision can move. It also changes the emotional meaning of circulation. Money leaving is not automatically loss. It may be shelter, nourishment, care, education, support, or investment. Money arriving is not automatically safety. It must be received by a self capable of stewardship. Attention turns money from a judge into a relationship. Now consider health. The old attention scans the body and names every change as threat. The renewed attention listens. It notices symptoms, seeks appropriate help, follows wise care, and also recognizes rest, function, improvement, nourishment, movement, and the body's constant effort toward balance. This gaze does not command mortality to disappear. It refuses to begin dying psychologically before life has finished speaking. It blesses medicine, knowledge, sleep, food, movement, prayer, and the hands that help. It refuses the division between divine care and practical care. Attention turns the body from an enemy into a sacred responsibility. Consider relationship. The old attention waits to be offended, abandoned, controlled, or rescued. The renewed attention notices truth. It observes how the body feels around a person. It recognizes reciprocity, pattern, effort, manipulation, safety, and the places where self-abandonment once called itself love. It can receive affection without demanding that affection become proof of permanent safety. It can see another person's wound without turning that wound into permission for harm. It can forgive without restoring access. It can set a boundary without making hatred the new bond. Attention turns relationship from a courtroom into a school of truth. Consider work. The old attention is owned by interruption, approval, and urgency. The renewed attention asks what work deserves depth, what work is merely noise, what skill must be strengthened, and what contribution can be made with integrity. One protected hour of complete attention may create more than a day of scattered effort. The person stops treating responsiveness as the highest form of usefulness. They learn that value often requires withdrawal from the immediate so that something lasting can be built. Attention turns work from reaction into creation. Consider the past. The old attention returns to prove the wound. The renewed attention returns only to retrieve truth, grief, lesson, and strength. It stops asking the past to change. It asks what the present must become because the past occurred. The person says, "I will not hand this fear to the next generation. I will not continue speaking the sentence that diminished me. I will not confuse familiar pain with destiny. I will carry the wisdom and release the altar." Attention turns the past from a ruler into a teacher. Consider the future. The old attention turns uncertainty into a theater of disaster. The renewed attention imagines with responsibility. It prepares, plans, develops, and acts, but refuses to suffer every possible outcome in advance. It asks, "What is mine to do today? What capacity does the future require me to build? What fear is asking for preparation, and what fear is asking only for worship? What possibility deserves a place in my imagination?" Attention turns the future from a tribunal into a field of cooperation with God. These changes are not produced by one dramatic insight. They are built through a daily liturgy of attention. Begin with morning consecration. Before the world enters, ask, "What will receive the first offering of my attention today?" Choose one quality: peace, truth, guidance, provision, courage, restoration, divine presence. Do not merely say the word, give it content. If the offering is peace, feel one quiet breath and decide what you will not enlarge. If it is truth, identify one place where performance will end. If it is guidance, ask for the next step rather than the entire map. If it is provision, notice what is already available and what can be ordered. If it is courage, choose the conversation, task, or boundary that courage will enter. If it is restoration, decide how the body and mind will be treated. If it is divine presence, enter the day remembering that no room is spiritually empty merely because it is ordinary. Then practice the midday return. At some point, the altar will be taken. A message, memory, fear, demand, or irritation will occupy it. This is not the failure of the practice. This is the moment the practice was designed for. Ask, what am I making larger right now? Is this object worthy of the life it is receiving? Does it require action, prayer, boundary, or release? What was the morning offering? Return to it. A single return can prevent an entire afternoon from being named by one event. Then practice evening release. Before sleep, review the day without becoming prosecutor or publicist. See what was offered. Where did fear take the altar? Where did you return? What received too much? What deserved more? Complete one action if possible. Write down what belongs to tomorrow. Give thanks for one mercy. Release what no longer deserves to follow you into the night. Ask, what am I carrying that cannot be solved while I sleep? What lesson can remain without the emotional argument? What final image do I choose to place in the subconscious? Then let the night become sacred again. Once each week, perform an examination of the altar. What occupied me? What strengthened me? What weakened me? What did I worship through repetition? What truth did I avoid? What beauty did I almost miss? What gate must be closed? What offering will guide the next week? The examination prevents unconscious drift. It does not demand perfection. It restores authorship. There will be seasons when attention becomes difficult. Grief narrows the world. Illness consumes energy. Financial crisis requires repeated thought. Caregiving divides the day. Trauma may make the mind vigilant. Do not use this teaching to accuse yourself during human difficulty. In such seasons, sacred attention may become very small. One breath, one true sentence, one necessary call, one meal, one moment beside a window, one refusal to predict the entire future, one prayer spoken without eloquence, The altar does not need a grand offering, it needs a faithful one. Small faithfulness is how a shattered attention is gathered. The guardian must also remember that control is not the purpose. Attention can become another obsession if the person believes every unwanted thought creates immediate catastrophe. This would make fear the hidden center of the practice. A thought is not a sentence from heaven. A moment of worry does not destroy the field. A distracted morning does not cancel growth. An old memory returning does not mean the wound is again in command. The power lies in repetition and return. The person who returns 1,000 times has trained a deeper authority than the person who waits for a mind that never wanders. William James called this repeated recovery a root of character and will. Spiritually, it is also a form of faith. Return says that the sacred center still exists even after it was forgotten. Return to the breath. Return to the truth. Return to the task. Return to the body. Return to the person before you. Return to God. The life that answers your gaze is not always the life you imagined. Attention may reveal that a desire was borrowed, a relationship was finished, an ambition was costing the soul, or a path once considered failure is actually freedom. Sacred attention does not force reality to obey the ego. It makes the person available to the reality through which a deeper life can emerge. Sometimes the answer to your gaze is an opening. Sometimes it is a boundary. Sometimes it is a delay. Sometimes it is the strength to remain. Sometimes it is the courage to leave. Sometimes it is provision. Sometimes it is the discovery that what you called lack was an invitation to develop capacity. Sometimes it is healing. Sometimes it is peace within what has not yet changed. Attention does not guarantee the form. It changes the receiver. Return now to the person who opened their eyes in the introduction. The room is the same, the phone remains near. The problem remembered yesterday still exists. The account has not transformed during the night. The difficult person has not become different. The body still carries its history. But before touching the world, the person places a hand upon the chest. The breath enters. Light is moving across the wall. For a few moments, no demand is allowed to name the day. The person gives thanks for life before life proves itself convenient. A sentence is chosen. Today my attention belongs to what builds life. Then the phone is opened, not by someone who has no gate, but by a guardian who has already decided who governs the altar. The world continues asking. Fear asks, memory asks, duty asks, desire asks. Other people ask, the screen asks, the wound asks. But asking is not the same as deserving. The life begins answering differently because the gaze has become different. Not blind, not naive, not detached from fact, consecrated. When attention becomes sacred, life stops feeling like a series of invasions and begins revealing itself as a field of conscious participation. The altar remains within you. The flame remains entrusted to you. Now the final work is to guard it without fear. Conclusion. Guard the flame. You have carried an altar within you through every season of your life. Before you knew its name, you placed things upon it. The faces you feared, the approval you needed, the future you tried to control, the money you believed could rescue or condemn you, the wound you returned to because forgetting felt like surrender, the body you watched with criticism or alarm, the opinions of people who did not know the cost of your choices. You placed these things there because attention had been trained to serve survival. Do not despise the former offering. Fear watched because it believed danger must be found before danger found you. Worry repeated itself because it believed repetition was preparation. Resentment kept the record because it believed pain would become meaningless if the record closed. Comparison studied others because it believed your own worth could be located by measuring distance. Urgency hurried because it believed stillness would allow life to collapse. These movements were not proof that you were weak. They were forms of intelligence operating without a wiser guardian. Now the guardian is awake. You understand that attention is not a minor faculty floating above the real events of life. It is where events become experience. It is where impressions become interpretations. Interpretations become emotional climates. Emotional climates become subconscious instructions, and subconscious instructions become patterns of perception and response. What receives attention receives life. What receives life repeatedly becomes familiar. What becomes familiar begins to appear true. What appears true shapes what you expect, permit, reject, pursue, and become. This is why the altar matters. The world will continue competing for it. There will always be a new fear, a new message, a new image, a new demand, a new reason to become divided. There will always be unfinished work. There will always be someone who does not understand you. The body will continue speaking. Money will continue moving. Relationships will continue revealing both love and limitation. The practice does not remove the world. It returns the center from which you enter the world. You learn that the altar is never empty. If no offering is chosen, habit will choose one. The loudest object will become most important. The oldest wound will decide what deserves the gaze. Therefore, the first responsibility is not perfect concentration. It is conscious dedication. You learn that thieves gather at the gate. Novelty, outrage, comparison, urgency, memory, and anticipatory fear ask for entry. Their power depends partly upon access. A gate does not make you unloving or uninformed. A gate allows you to receive what is necessary without becoming occupied by everything that can enter. You learn that the mind becomes what it beholds. Attention is not a window through which you remain unchanged. What you contemplate gathers emotional weight. The body follows the image. The memory collects supporting evidence. Identity begins wearing the atmosphere of the object. You learn that the subconscious receives the offering. It does not listen only to public declarations or brief moments of hope. It receives repetition, emotion, image, and identity. It receives the sentence spoken after the mistake, the film watched before sleep, the expectation beneath the prayer, and the family law repeated without examination. You learn that the wound controls attention by assigning it a protective task. Abandonment looks for distance. Humiliation looks for judgment. Scarcity looks for loss. Bodily fear looks for danger. The wound did not become vigilant to harm you. It tried to prevent surprise. Yet the past cannot be allowed to select the entire present. You learned that attention trains the world you are able to see. It brings some facts into focus and leaves others at the edge. It can study lack while ignoring resource, study offense while ignoring truth, study decline while ignoring life, and study silence while ignoring guidance. To change the lens is not to deny reality. It is to receive more of reality. You learned that urgency is a false religion. It promises salvation after the next task and keeps the soul moving before life can be inhabited. It calls anxiety responsibility and speed wisdom. But a hurried mind cannot distinguish fear from guidance. One breath can become a doorway through which a wiser response enters. You learned the sacred use of refusal. A thought may knock without being invited to remain. A person may ask without deserving unlimited access. A memory may return without receiving another hour. A wound may speak without becoming law. A sacred no protects the altar for a greater yes. You learned that attention can become prayer. Prayer begins before language, in the willingness to become present. Listening can become prayer. Work can become prayer. Gratitude can become prayer. Care for the body can become prayer. Release can become prayer. God is not made present by attention. Attention makes you present to God. Finally, you learned that the life answers the gaze, not always through the form demanded by the ego, but through the self the gaze prepares. Attention toward truth prepares honest action. Attention toward provision prepares stewardship. Attention toward dignity prepares boundaries. Attention toward grace prepares recognition. Attention toward God prepares a person to enter uncertainty without believing the universe has become empty. Now the teaching must leave the page and enter the day. Do not attempt to transform every object upon the altar at once. Pressure would only become the next object of worship. Choose one faithful practice. For the next 7 days, protect 3 thresholds. The first threshold is morning. Before receiving the world, give the first offering. Sit for a moment before reaching toward a screen. Feel the breath. Notice the room. Remember that consciousness has returned to another day. Choose one quality that will guide attention. Peace, guidance, provision, courage, truth, restoration, divine presence. Speak the word slowly. Then ask what it means in behavior. Peace may mean refusing to answer one message from panic. Guidance may mean listening for the next step rather than demanding the whole map. Provision may mean organizing what already exists before asking for more. Courage may mean initiating a conversation. Truth may mean ending a performance. Restoration may mean respecting the body before exhaustion. Divine presence may mean entering an ordinary task without calling the moment spiritually empty. The second threshold is interruption. At least once during the day, attention will be captured. Do not be surprised. The world is not failing the practice, it is giving the practice a place to become real. Pause. Ask what has entered the sanctuary. Name it without shame. Fear, comparison, resentment, urgency, the need to be understood, the desire to control an outcome. Then ask what the object requires. Action, boundary, prayer, information, grief, release. Give it what is wise, not everything it demands. Then return to the morning offering. The third threshold is night. Do not allow the final attention of the day to be selected by accident. Close what can be closed. Write what must be remembered. Put down what cannot be solved in darkness. Review one place where you returned. Receive one mercy fully. Choose one image or sentence for the subconscious. I am guided even while the whole path remains unseen. My body rests beneath care rather than accusation. Provision is moving through channels I am learning to recognize. The past has delivered its lesson and no longer requires tonight. God is nearer than the problem I cannot solve before sleep. Then release the day. These three thresholds are enough to begin. Morning dedication, midday return, evening release. Do not measure the 7 days by whether every external condition changes. Look first for the inner evidence. Did you notice the capture sooner? Did you reduce one unnecessary rehearsal? Did the body soften more quickly? Did one ordinary moment become more vivid? Did you recognize support that would once have been ignored? Did a boundary become clearer? Did a thought lose authority because you stopped giving it agreement? Did prayer become less desperate and more present? These are not small results. They are the early architecture of another experienced world. The old altar may reappear. A difficult event may restore an old offering for several hours or days. Do not declare the work lost. Return without drama. Return is the central spiritual gesture of this book. The mind wanders, return. The wound takes the lens, return. The screen enters first, return. The day becomes hurried, return. The old sentence enters the mouth, correct it and return. The future becomes a theater of fear. Return to the next action. The past asks for another trial. Keep the lesson and return. The person who returns is not beginning again from nothing. Every return strengthens the path home. There is no need to fear every negative thought. Fear of thought would become another form of captivity. A passing image does not own the altar. A moment of anger does not define the day. A worried morning does not cancel years of growth. What matters is what receives repetition, agreement, identity, and life. You are not responsible for preventing every bird from crossing the sky. You are responsible for deciding which one is allowed to build a nest in the sanctuary. This is the dignity of the guardian. The guardian does not hate the world outside the gate. The guardian simply knows that access is sacred. The guardian does not attack the wound. The guardian thanks it for protection and removes it from command. The guardian does not worship control. The guardian acts where action is possible and releases what belongs to a larger order. The guardian does not demand a perfect mind. The guardian remembers the flame. That flame is awareness itself. It can illuminate money without worshipping money. It can illuminate pain without becoming pain. It can illuminate a relationship without losing itself inside the relationship. It can illuminate the future without pretending to own it. It can illuminate the past without rebuilding the past. It can illuminate the world while remaining rooted in God. Guarding the flame does not mean hiding it. The purpose of light is to reveal. Place it upon work that deserves creation. Place it upon people who deserve presence. Place it upon truth that has been avoided. Place it upon beauty until beauty becomes emotionally real. Place it upon the body with reverence. Place it upon provision with stewardship. Place it upon the remaining years with gratitude rather than regret. Place it upon the part of your life that is still waiting to be lived. There may be something you have ignored because fear occupied the altar first. A book, a business, a prayer, a relationship, a gift, a conversation, a field of study, a form of service, a quieter way of living. When attention is returned from survival alone, the unlived life begins to become visible. Your future enters through what you are willing to notice today. Notice the door. Notice the strength already developed. Notice what no longer deserves your years. Notice the person who is trying to love you. Notice the body asking for friendship. Notice the idea returning with patience. Notice the moment when God feels absent, only because the mind is crowded. Notice what becomes possible when you stop feeding what has already taken enough. This is not the end of distraction. It is the beginning of consecration. The world will continue asking for your attention. Fear will ask. Memory will ask. Pain will ask. Desire will ask. Duty will ask. Other people will ask. But asking is not the same as deserving. If this journey has helped you recognize the sacred power hidden inside your attention, subscribe and remain connected to these teachings. Return whenever the world becomes louder than the voice within, and let each message remind you that the altar of your mind was never meant to belong to fear. Now let the teaching close with one decision. The flame will no longer be placed wherever the world points. You will choose what deserves its light. Not every thought deserves another hour. Not every wound deserves another offering. Not every voice belongs inside the sanctuary. Not every urgency is a command. Place your attention where life is being built. Place it where truth becomes clear. Place it where the body remembers peace. Place it where the soul can hear God again. For what receives your attention receives your life. What receives your life becomes your inner world. And the world within you is the place from which every remaining step will be taken. Guard the flame.